Hello, I'm Jessica Shelley. I'm the co-founder and head educator at Dailies Pods. Today we have Miss Megan with us, who is one of our talented Dailies Pods educators, to share a little bit more about something that she's passionate about in the field of education. So thank you, Miss Megan, for joining us.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. Can you give us a quick introduction to yourself and why you like teaching with Dailies Pods?
My name is Miss Megan, or just Megan for parents. I love working with Dailies Pods because I love that I get to interact with kiddos from all over the country. I'm so used to being in a classroom and really getting that kind of, one-on-one physical interaction with them. So being able to do it virtually is really, really an exciting thing. I have a couple of kids in my class who are in California, and then I have another kiddo who's up in Maryland, and so like one of them is eating breakfast and one is eating lunch, and they love that. So it's really fun to see the interactions between all of them.
That is so special. That was one of my favorite things too. And my son actually does Dailies Pods. And he has friends from all over the country now. It's like, man, we never would have had that opportunity if we were maybe restricted to a physical setting. So I'm excited to have been able to learn more about this too as we've been creating it for families. But awesome. Well, what are we going to be talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Reggio Emilia approach, and it kind of falls underneath open-ended learning and open-ended activities, which is something that I really enjoy and I'm really an advocate for teachers and families.
Great. Well, I'm excited to get into it and learn a little bit more and share some more of this information with parents too. So what is the Reggio Emilia approach?
Yeah, so the Reggio Emilia approach is very natural and a very hands-on approach to learning. It kind of provides students their own opportunity to explore and experience at their own pace with their own interests. And parents and teachers are not so much like a strict teacher in it. They're more of a facilitator, and they set out the materials and invite their students and their kiddos to kind of, like I said, explore in a very natural hands-on way, and then use what they observe their child most interested in, and then kind of use that as a building block to plan lessons and activities.
Awesome. Awesome. Could you give me maybe an example of what that could look like in a classroom?
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples that I have is when I was teaching in a preschool class. I had some kiddos who were very obsessed with crocodiles.
Oh, cool.
And so I was like, okay, like let's do crocodiles. And I had, these activities planned that were very kind of laid out, like here's a worksheet, here's a project we're going to do. And that is not so much a Reggio Emilia approach. They really wanted to get in there and like feel the textures of alligators and kind of, see where they live. So a lot of open-ended activities that I did. We had a sand table set out with toy alligators that they were able to get in. It's a Reggio Emilia, can also be a very messy approach to learning. So it was lots of sand and paint everywhere. But that's how they learn, that physical touch. They were listening to different sounds that animals could make. And then I had some different texture materials too. So it was
Awesome.
a very exciting classroom for,
For sure. It sounds like you sign my kids up, they'd be all over that. I don't know how messy they would go because I've seen our house. So I'm not sure about the classroom. But yeah, that sounds like super fun and engaging for kids to get them involved in the learning process. So you said that students kind of like pick up on what they're most interested in, and then the teachers use that as like the guide. I guess, like, how do they pick it? Like, how do you know to put out crocodiles or blocks or cars, or like how do you know what they're interested in?
Yeah, so I usually pick kind of a general theme or topic that I'll choose. So that actually was a jungle theme that we were working on.
Cool.
And so I had different animals set out, and plants and just kind of different things that you might see in a jungle. Obviously I don't live in a jungle, but what I thought might be there. And I noticed that my students were really gravitating towards more of that alligator, crocodile, animal bin that I had set out. And so over the course of a few days, I observed it and I really watched. I knew that my students like to get messy. So any opportunity to throw that in and not have it happen at home for my parents.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of like a observe, reflect, and then build on what you see your students, taking off from. Not everything worked the way I thought, or not every plan really launched with them. But it is a very, like, you start big and you just work your way into your students' interests. And that theme lasted for about 2 weeks. And then another student brought in a car and we kind of shifted gears into vehicles. But we still kept our crocodile love going in our classroom.
That's awesome. There may be parents that maybe are more familiar with, like, the public school system, private school system, where it is very much more structured, and they have like those specific learning objectives and all of those things. So I guess, how does that integrate into the Reggio approach, since it is more open-ended?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I do have a lot of parents who are, Reggio and open-ended we don't really do worksheets. We practice writing, but it's not, you don't sit down and copy and paste everything that needs to be copied and pasted.
Right.
So it goes a lot into that concept of open-ended questions. And open-ended materials. So if a parent is concerned that their child, they're not seeing, them writing their ABCs out, or they're not seeing those worksheets coming home with their handwriting, they can work on maybe letter sounds. I had a pod recently where we were looking at letters and I was like, really, come on, let's do our ABCs. And they weren't interested, and I could tell that I was sort of losing interest. And so we shifted gears into an activity about words that sound like, for example, the letter B. So we thought of words that started with a b sound.
Yeah.
And that way we still got the concept of ABCs, but it was more of a real world approach to it. So parents can ask, tell me about what you did today, or what do you think, instead of those strict yes or no questions.
Right. And those open-ended things, I love how you brought that up too, because they may not necessarily have like the physical evidence of what they learned, because it is more about that experience and that, shared community of whatever activity they're working on together. So just because they may not have a worksheet or have something that they've produced in the end, doesn't mean they didn't learn. But
Exactly.
I like how you provided those questions too for them to ask about, tell me about what you learned. That totally shifts the conversation dynamic too, because it's more than just that yes or no answer.
Exactly. And it goes along with like art projects too. A lot of, my cats, like my cat doesn't look like a cat. So I'll usually give parents kind of a little blurb too, like, here's what the materials, here's the idea. Ask your child what they created, instead of like, tell me about your cat, using those who, what, why, all those big important questions.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any special Reggio Emilia schools?
So they're kind of like yes and no. I know we hear a lot about Montessori style schools, which are more well known, and they have more materials that they like to include in their schools. Whereas the Reggio Emilia approach is, kind of that open, we're going to explore what we want to. So there are more Reggio Emilia style schools in Italy, which is where it was founded.
Right.
But over here in America, they have schools that are Reggio Emilia style. So they foster that natural learning. And when you walk in, you can see through art, there's a lot of art that happens, and sense of community through the classrooms and through the school. My favorite part about Reggio Emilia schools is they have like a workspace dedicated just to art and to exploration. So if you're looking for like a very specific Reggio Emilia learning center, you'll find that they often have an atelier, which is their art, my pronunciation, their art workspace where the students can go and explore and create.
Awesome. Yeah. And it sounds like it could be a really nice approach too for parents at home who are maybe like just starting out something, or maybe they're in virtual education, like in our pods classes, to kind of get that balance of, in America or the United States, our schools are a little bit more like very structured and there's like set standards and all of those things. So, it's nice to have that ability to kind of balance and choose and select what best fits your child and what best fits your family.
Right.
And that sounds like this could be a really great option too for some of those families. So, awesome. Well, could you describe another example maybe of an open-ended activity? Like what does that look like, or how could parents maybe implement that at home?
Yeah. So another one, I feel like it's always, especially I do a lot of pre-K classes, so we're always into like cars and dinosaurs, and we did like a bubble gum theme once. But if you notice, so for example, at home, if you notice that your kiddos are into like cars and construction, um, instead of, again, finding worksheets or like, hey, I'm going to show you how to draw a car,
Yeah.
you can maybe go out in your neighborhood, get outside a little bit and go on a car scavenger hunt. You can talk about different colors or sizes that you may see, not only of cars in your neighborhood, but, motorcycles or bikes and vehicles. And then taking that inside at home, a really great open-ended activity that I love to do is painting with cars. So
Cool.
setting out lots of paper.
I was gonna say, prep
Lots of
the table
paper.
first.
Yes, have a designated art area.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
Paper and paint and toy cars that you're okay with getting a little messy, and just kind of leaving it there and inviting either your child or your students over to explore it. And oftentimes, more than not, the student will dip their car in the paint and just start driving. And so you are able to create those track marks. And then from there, it can lead into, a math activity. How far did you drive, or how long did you drive? You can throw some ABCs, some alphabet in there. And just that one, like that scavenger hunt led into the art activity, which then bridged into math and science. So it really is about creating those building blocks just from a basic interest that your child may have.
That's a great point. That's a great point. We, my 5-year-old, he's getting ready to start kindergarten in the fall. And so he's like practicing all of his shapes and his letters. I mean, I'm there to support him, but he's like just super interested in like getting ready for school, and he feels like a big kid and everything. So he's been obsessed with school buses recently because he's like, I just really want to ride the bus. And someone in our neighborhood drives a school bus. And so he's like, was talking about the shapes because he's like, I really want to draw a school bus. And I asked him, okay, so tell me a little bit more about your plan, because we're driving home. Of course, we can't like stop right there and like draw a school bus. So we're talking through the plan, and he's like, I'm going to draw circles for the wheels and a rectangle for the bus and then little squares for the windows. And I was like, wow, you've got like this great plan. And it's like, then he came home, he executed. Now he has a picture of a car and a school bus. We talked about shapes, all just from driving home from the grocery store.
Look at you already implementing those Reggio Emilia ideas.
I guess it's really not that hard, I guess, when you just like have a conversation and kind of get them figuring out what they're interested in and then kind of implementing from there.
Right. And encouraging those verbal skills and sentence structure. And our little students, they have a lot of thoughts and ideas inside their heads that they want to share with the world.
Oh yes. Oh my goodness. And it's crazy too how different they are. Like my middle son, he's 4, so he's very close in age to my oldest, but they are like polar opposites. He's like, I was like, do you want to go to school this year? We could like do preschool at like an actual school. And he's like, no. I was like, okay, well, your big brother's super excited about school this year, so we're gonna let him live that excitement. And we will continue to do dailies pods too. And I mean, I'm sure my oldest will still do dailies pods too, because he just loves all of his teachers. He like cries at the end of classes sometimes. She's like, he's gonna miss me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, buddy.
I love when I have students where I won't log off till everyone else has logged off, just in case they have questions. And I have a few who just sit there and we just chat or just kind of look at each other waiting for the other.
Yeah.
To make the first move.
That is so sweet. Yeah, it's really so special to like the relationships over virtual education, like that we're being able to see with our families. And I mean, my family has experienced it. Teachers are experiencing it. It's pretty incredible there too. Yeah, awesome. Well, I guess as far as the virtual classroom space goes, then how do you suggest implementing these principles or this approach in a virtual setting?
Yeah, so that I talked a little bit before, that really comes into kind of asking those open-ended questions, as opposed to saying, for example, a bus. Have you ever ridden a bus? Have you ever seen a bus? Instead asking, where or like who might ride a bus? Where might you take the bus? Because there is really no wrong answer. You could take a bus or a car anywhere that you needed to.
Right. Yeah.
And that then bridges into students who have ridden a bus. I found that we did a transportation unit recently. Students then will talk about, hey, yes, I have been on a bus. And that builds on their conversational skills as they're all kind of talking with each other about what it was like or what they saw. And then like we talked about, virtual learning is very hard to find those worksheets and, kind of see exactly what they're doing in class. Especially because I'm not handing things out, or I'm not really getting that extra hands-on approach to my students as they're learning. So in my pods, we tend to do a lot of scavenger hunts. And that not just on our wacky Wednesdays, we'll do it on Thoughtful Thursday or Try It Tuesday. We did a opposite scavenger hunt the other day. So we talked about big and small. And I asked my students if they could go find something small. Like that was just go and find it. And I had some students bring back cars. I had a student bring back a crayon. One of my little girls brought back her baby sister because she's
How precious.
And so that, I didn't say go find me a small toy. I just said something small, and that built on, why did you bring this back? Tell me about how this is small compared to something big. Or we talked about families, then big sisters and little sisters. And we'll do kind of open-ended drawing. I won't say, sometimes I will say, here's how we make this letter. But then I'll ask, can you draw something else that might look like this letter? And it's very up to the student to decide how they're going to experience or use their creativity in the activity. And then I'll always promote my students to share, or other virtual teachers promote your students to hold up what they've done, to share and kind of talk their way through it, so that some students who maybe are not so comfortable with just that broad approach to learning can see that it's okay to be messy. It's okay to make mistakes. We're all learning in our own way, adults and children alike.
Yeah. And I think too, like the value in hearing about how other people think about things, since it is so open, there's not like, it's not black and white. Like there's so many different interpretations, and that's actually really cool too, because even as a teacher, like you learn so much more from them, from the experience of like, oh wow, they took it this way, and like this is how they can explain it, and that's so different than this other student that did something similar,
right?
Also explaining it in a different way. So
we did self-portraits, and I asked if they could draw a picture of you, and a couple of my students wrote the letter U, and I was like, hey, that's what I asked you.
Right.
I invited you to do. So it is, it's just so exciting, virtually and in person, with this open-ended approach, to really see how our students are taking it. And just like we're observing them, they're also observing us, and just really that teamwork and that ability to work together is so special about this approach to learning.
Yeah, yeah. And it's cool too to think about, how the pods kind of are that I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure a good chunk of our teachers do scavenger hunts too. When I was teaching dailies pods as well, I did scavenger hunts every single time. And my son has become very attached to the scavenger hunts and will recognize when there's not one done in one of the
Yes,
classes.
I have a few students like that too.
Yeah, just because it does get them up and moving and thinking about things that are in their environment, and then those become the learning tools, right? So it is very much more that organic approach. Um, but I love too how even the daily spot sessions do set them up for whatever they could be continuing learning at home. If a parent asks, what did you learn about today? That's a great opportunity for a parent to kind of jump on that and then think about how they could extend that to at home, with whatever topic. So it's nice to have that open communication with parents, and that doesn't even happen in like the public school system. I was a public school teacher, and I was like, man, I've talked to this parent one time in the last month because we have 25 kids, and it's just so different than the dynamic at Dailies Pods where you only have 8 to 9 kids maybe maximum in your class. And
yeah, I love
you connect
that.
every day if you need to.
And it really helps. I'll do weekly themes, and it really helps make my planning a little bit easier too, because I'm able to, especially with the scavenger hunts, if everybody brings back a similar item or a similar toy, I can kind of sense that, okay, we can use this as a building, a building block and a bridge into a new theme. And sometimes it works, and sometimes like attention spans are not fully developed yet. Sometimes it's just like that 10 minutes was all we needed. And that can be a challenge for teachers too, to really kind of keep your brain thinking, like, if this activity is not working, how can we loop it back in? So
yeah, and that's a great point for parents too, is just to like realize that even if you try something at home, like if you put in the effort to, do the car painting or something and your child isn't engaged, it's totally okay. Like, it's not like, oh no, I'm never gonna, don't not spend the time with them doing something like that because they weren't engaged in that activity, but maybe use it as an opportunity to like go on another scavenger hunt and go through a walk, and like what do they notice on the walk, of are they more gravitating towards the plants or animals that they may see versus vehicles? And then that could be, inspiration for another activity.
That's so true. I read somewhere that, in your classroom, don't put one thing out for one day and put it away if there's no interest. It's all about, testing and then reflecting. So if something doesn't work, leave that activity out again, and maybe add, like, if you have crayons and paper out and they're not so much into the crayons, maybe put like safety scissors or watercolors out and see where you can add to it. And maybe crayons will then become an interest. So it's all about that, observing and reflecting and trusting the process as you go.
Yeah, I remember too, when I taught kindergarten, we used to have a writing center, and there was always like lined paper, and they could write really whatever they wanted, but there was like examples there for them to like see, so that they didn't have to feel like they were having to create everything from their brain. But I remember when we started the writing center, it was always just pencils and paper, because traditionally that's what you use in school, and the expectation is that you use a pencil to write,
Yeah.
But it was so amazing to see, like, oh, after we kind of like learned how to write with a pencil, then we also introduced like markers, and then markers became part of the writing center, and man, the kids gravitated towards that. That was their favorite thing, because now they could write in color. And then the crayons, and then there was like opportunities for them to like illustrate a picture after they wrote a story, and it became so much more than what that original writing center was, as far as like the framework. So thinking too about how the materials can really affect the overall engagement too on an activity is great.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Chalk is always an exciting one too.
Gosh, chalk. Yeah, go outside. Go for it. Chalk and water is also really cool. And like I've seen like spray bottle stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
That builds into the sensory
yeah,
activity. If you have someone maybe who doesn't like to get their hands wet or, just touch, I mean, chalk is and water, it can get kind of mushy, and a spray bottle, you can be involved in the activity, but you don't have to physically be touching anything that you don't want to be.
right. That is always something that my family, especially as probably many other families do think of those things too, but my middle son has some sensory things too. And so we're always like, okay, we would love to go out and do chalk, but then also is that going to maybe like set him off into something that, he's uncomfortable and now he doesn't want to do that activity. So thinking through those kinds of things too, even from different kids in your class or different kids at home. I mean, every child is different. I've got 3 little boys and they are all so different. So I'm sure that that's the same for many of our parents too, that have kiddos with different preferences, and that really could, make or break that learning activity too, just to think through the different options.
Right. And even in our pods too. I mean, we have students who will sit and write and, color the whole time. And I have other students who they're not really interested in that. So sometimes instead of sharing what they've drawn, I'll just invite them to, talk about what they're thinking, or share a toy that they would like to draw, but they're not really interested in doing that right now. So definitely, yeah, it's a big brainstorming approach.
Right. Yeah. And even just thinking, like, going back to your example of like the painting with the cars, like I could see my middle son for sure grabbing the car and running the paint through because he doesn't have to touch it. But then I
Right.
feel like with my oldest, he'd be like, great, it's like finger painting, let's go. And he's like painting with his hands a car or something. So it's just so different too, like thinking through the materials. Not that it has to be like overthought or like super intentional, but like you said too, just like throwing things out there and seeing what they do and what they gravitate towards.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of pick up too on more of those nuances about your child even.
Right.
So,
That's a big material that I found works. I mean, across the board, no matter what students or your children are interested in, is paper towel tubes are like
yeah.
the cheapest and the easiest toy across when I've been in classrooms and virtually, and just from observing other classrooms. I mean, there's so much you can do with just a paper towel tube. You can, paint and look through them and roll with it. So it's just you don't have to, go out and buy the biggest and the best materials for your student. Just anything natural that you can find and introduce to them, and it promotes recycling too, so you get kind of that twofer right in there.
Yeah, that is awesome too that you bring that up. My kids gravitate towards, we have like plastic cups that we use for parties, and so then all of a sudden they notice those in the pantry, and it's like, oh great, these are my rocket boosters, mom. And I'm like, sweet, all right, just don't use all of them since we're gonna need to have some. But yeah, then like last night we went out to dinner and they gave us an extra straw at the restaurant, and it was like in a paper wrapping, so it was like all fresh and clean. And my son goes, I'm gonna save this for my next project. And I was like, okay, but like just walk out nicely. Like don't get weird looks from people that were taking a straw that was brought to our
My husband always laughs at me when I used to teach in person, and we'd get a box and I'd be like, that's a really great box. Don't do anything with this box. Like, I need that to save it. And I mean, if you're not used to this, even the Reggio or the open-ended approach, it can seem a little chaotic at times, and a little random at times, but there's a method to the madness, to the straws and the boxes. And I mean, you just ask, you ask your students, you ask your children, what can we do with this? And invite that creativity and that imagination to come out.
Yeah. And honestly, it feels like lower prep too than like having to like buy workbooks and print off things. Like it just
really
feels more that it could like fit in with your life. Not to say that there's not a place for like checking understanding with worksheets and things like that, but just to know that like there's other options out there for parents too, as far as engaging their children and learning experiences that go maybe beyond a page,
Definitely. Yeah, I've worked in schools and centers that, I mean, both opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I worked in a very structured, it was a preschool, but a very structured preschool. And then I've also worked in a Reggio and observed in a lot, a lot of different Reggio classrooms. And I mean, the same student might work with one and it might not work with the other. So yeah, just really keeping, like we talk about open-ended activities, keeping that open-ended mind and thought as an adult.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And then I guess kind of going into that piece of like documentation of learning, can you tell me more about like the importance maybe of having documentation to support like Reggio learning at home or even in a virtual classroom, physical classroom? How do you make sure that students are kind of progressing along?
Right. So one of the first Reggio classes that I took in college actually was an art class that was open ended. But our my professor talked about, have a notebook, just something. It doesn't have to be a fancy notebook, but have a notebook out during class that you can kind of jot down what you're seeing happening. And it could be as simple as, this student loves paint or this student wanted tape, like just just something. It's random. If you were to read my documentation notebooks, you wouldn't really understand what was going on, but there's thoughts and processes to it. And so both as a teacher and as a parent, it can help you remember. You don't have to have a notebook. We're in a very virtual world. Take pictures on your phone of activities that your child seems to enjoy, that you can then go back and see, how they reacted to it, see for your own sake what you did, what you had put out for them, and what you can add to it. When I teach virtually, I do have a notebook. I'm sure my parents can see me like writing things down, but I use it for my Glow and Grow reports as well. And it really helps me keep track too of maybe what students need a little bit more support in different areas of learning, because we do still stick to those standards. So it helps me, kind of see what areas of learning they might need a little bit more boost or support in. And then I'll jot down ideas that they seem to be interested in and try to really tie it all together.
Awesome. Yeah. And I love that you bring that up too. So like, we're trained educators, so we've gone through the process. We're super familiar with the standards and kind of what's expected at each age or grade level. So I guess as far as parents go, how do they know if they're trying to extend too far and maybe that's causing some frustration or something with their learner? Or how do they know if it's something's too easy? Or I mean, since it is more of that organic approach, like how do you figure out, what those questions could be? Like, oh, how many are there? And if they only count to 5, is that okay? Or are we really trying to get them to 10,
No, that's a great question. And I was actually going to say, I mean, it's always important. Maybe look for some frustration that your child may have if you're really wanting them to count to 10. And like you said, if they're only getting to 5, stick with 5, stick with 5 until they're ready. You can maybe bring in, hey, we have 5 fingers. What happens if an extra finger comes in? And just kind of taking it one step at a time instead of, throwing all of this information at them. Parents, I mean, can always, find standards or look for standards just to kind of have an idea of what they can be practicing. But all of our children, we all develop differently, we all grow differently. And so finding a lot of, figures, toys, different ways to just organically bring it in to the learning process, and then asking those open-ended questions, like for letters, this letter sounds like this. What is a toy that we have that sounds like that letter too? And I mean, once a child, if you see they're losing interest in it, maybe end it for the day and visit it again. It's okay to repeat and review every day or a couple days with your students until they seem comfortable with it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And also thinking too about like the resources that, they would have access to kind of learning more of like, hey, my child's only 3. Is it okay that they're only counting to 5? Or should I be introducing 6? If their child is counting to 5, for sure, introduce 6 and like the next numbers along the sequence. But there is like, you can access like standards online. Dailies pods, we have a great group of educators and a support system for parents too. So if you want to like call and talk it through and like take notes, or you want to get an email, like we'd be more than happy to help as well. Um, Especially for parents that maybe you're like, hey, I haven't done anything with my kid and I don't know where to start. It's like, okay, well, take advantage of those authentic learning moments, and then maybe also get like a workbook if you can for their age level, and then you can flip through and you can see what skills they should be working on and try to integrate that into those organic activities and check their understanding on the page. It's
building building on interests, and like you said, very organically. If your child is not interested in, I don't know, different like weather. I just looked out my window. It's sunny here. If they're not interested in, weather or nature, don't push, we don't have to go outside and look at trees. We can go outside and, look at other things, or just maybe stand. And I mean, don't push what your child isn't ready for or isn't interested in, because it's just going to make it harder on the adult and the teacher stand.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, that's where some frustration, parents might see some of that, resistance too, of like, I don't like to learn, or I don't like to go to school. Maybe it's because they're not learning about things that they're interested in, or learning in ways that, make sense to them. If you're forced to use a specific material for a specific purpose at a specific time of day, like, oh my gosh, we all have different working styles, even as adults. So I couldn't imagine. Yeah, I couldn't imagine someone being like, oh no, you can only use this color sticky note for this task, and like document it with this color of a pen, and it's due by 2. Like, what? Like, we all just work organically, and we kind of like figure out how we work best. And I think that, having that grace and that understanding with our youngest learners as they're kind of trying to figure out who they are and how their brain works and how the world works, even like,
exactly. The world's a big place.
It is. It's overwhelming, and I'm a grown-up. Like, there's so many things out there that I don't know. That, I mean, we're always just learning, and so, kind of coming at it from that angle too, of just being supportive, and if there is frustration, ask why. Like, why are you frustrated right now? That's a great open-ended question to ask, instead of saying maybe like, are you frustrated because you're having to use a pencil? Like, we don't want to lead them into anything.
Right.
But yeah, also just giving options, I think, is a great way to kind of bridge that. We don't want kids to hate learning or hate school or hate learning opportunities or engaging with peers or anything like that. So whatever we can do to kind of support them with guidance.
Right. I always say the Reggio, I mean, if you were to look, it's chaos, but it's not. It's got an organization to it that as adults we can see, and our students can pick up on it. And
they thrive really on structure. And I love how like the Reggio approach is the adult is providing the structure, or like at least the options for whatever they're kind of experimenting with. But then at the same time, like, it feels so open and freeing for the child. So it's not like we're saying, oh yeah, you can use any materials in the entire classroom, ready, set, go. It's more of like, hey, like, here's some things that you could look at.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Reggio. They sometimes refer to the classroom as like the third teacher or the third educator. And it is, if you set them up to succeed, I mean, we'll succeed.
Yeah. So yeah, I just really appreciate you sharing more about this approach today. And it gets me excited too, to like, what are my kids doing right now?
Right, it gets brain thinking, just even this right now, I've like been in my head, I'm like, okay, we could definitely, like, that's a great idea that I just shared with everyone. We're gonna do it in class.
Yeah, I love it. Is there anything else that you think parents should know or teachers should know about like implementing this kind of approach in their learning? Or maybe if they're not as, familiar, as comfortable with kind of like the openness of it, how could they kind of get started?
Yeah, so the advice I always give to new teachers and even new parents about it is kind of that start big, start broad, offer just any natural materials that you have. Like if you have a box, if you have pouch tops are really a big hit too. And that can, look at colors. If a parent is like, I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure where to start, start with colors and see where you can bridge from there. Asking your child, where do you see this color, or can you find something this color? And then you're able to really narrow it or kind of funnel it down into more of those standards, or exactly, what you are looking for your child to get out of it. But it was a collaborative effort in your family.
I love
And I mean, I'm always here if parents or anyone has questions. But I love to just say, I mean, Pinterest has a lot of great blogs and different search engines that you can use on Pinterest. If you just type in open-ended, art, or open-ended jungle with a theme. And I found a lot of great support virtually too, if you're unsure where to go.
Yeah, and it sounds like too, that our classes actually really do integrate a lot of this kind of approach as well, even within our structure of a daily spots class. But it would be a great opportunity too for parents to maybe sit beside their child as they're doing a daily spots class and kind of see from a teacher like what they're doing to kind of blend the two types of things of using academic standards, and we still have a structure and a form, but then also like, oh wow, there's like these open-ended activities that we could kind of further extend with.
Yeah.
So that could be a really great opportunity to kind of see it in action and ask any questions too, or send an email, and we'd be more than happy to help and support however we can too.
Definitely. Yeah. If the documentation of a parent observes what's happening, and then later that night is kind of like, I really liked that, or I don't know what that thought process was. Yeah. We're here to help and answer. And like you said, I mean, we're not only supporting your students or your kiddos, but we're also here to support you too, and make learning the smoothest, the smoothest ride that we can for you.
Yes, it is a challenge. There's just so many different like kid personalities, parent personalities, dynamics, and everything. So we feel it as a classroom teacher when we have 25 kids in our class, all coming from different areas. So if we can, go directly to the source and help support the parent in creating that really supportive dynamic, I think that that's even better. So excited that we are in a position to do that with parents and students through our platform. But is there anything else that you wanted to share today, or
just keep those open-ended, keep your brain open-ended, keep asking, those who, what, why, where questions instead of the yes or no questions. And just, if you let your child talk and explore, you will learn, you'll learn right alongside them what they're interested in and what you're interested in too. So yeah, just keep open-ended, and know that it's okay to not see, structured based learning, because there is still learning happening.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Parents, if you're interested in joining one of Miss Meghan's classes, feel free to sign into dailyspods.com and select her on the calendar. I'm sure she would love to talk more about this approach with you.
I could go on forever.
Well, parent availability and scheduling.
Right. We'll get that 5 minutes between classes, and we can do that.
There you go. 5 minutes. No, but in all honesty, everyone is super available here at Daily Pods to support parents in however we can. Really just getting at the heart of how kids learn, and really, making them excited about what they're learning, engaged in what they're learning, in hopes to get them talking about what they're learning too at home. So I love how we provided some tips here for parents to get started and teachers to integrate this approach. And yeah, I just thank you again for your time, and parents will see you again soon. We'll see your students again soon. And if you're new to us, we look forward to meeting you soon.
Yes, I can't wait to see my old friends and some new friends in class.
Yeah, it's awesome. It'll be a nice big family. But everyone have a great rest of your day. And Miss Meghan, thank you again for your time. And we will see you all again soon. Bye.